The race everybody was following last night, obviously the huge upset by Bernie-backed Andrew Gillum in Florida, surging from down in the third and fourth place in the polls to win the governor's nomination. The race that fewer people were following, in which a progressive surged to victory as well, was in Arizona. This is David Garcia. Aida Chavez, reporter with The Intercept, was out about a month ago covering the campaign. You rode around with David Garcia, was the education secretary in the state, or like ran education, or tell us a little bit about him and how he won.
Right, so he's this education expert. He's basically devoted his entire career and life to it as a university professor, and also did some work for like the state legislature when it comes to education policy. And so it's really something that he lives and breathes.
You know, on the national level, we don't talk about education policy a ton, but in Arizona, where the Republicans have been destroying the public schools over the last decade or so, it was a pretty resonant issue. Where did it rank in priority for voters there, in your estimation?
A lot of people that I talked to, actually, I think everyone I spoke to, kind of described it as the number one issue facing the state. Like, teachers are making poverty wages, and schools are just infested with mold. Textbooks are falling apart. It's reached crisis levels.
Yeah, and this is a state that's undergone a real radical experiment in slashing government. He came to Washington several months ago for a training that the Progressive Change Campaign Committee put on, and I was allowed to sit in and watch the candidate training. About 50 candidates. He was one of them, and they all kind of learned how to do stump speeches. His by far, like his public speaking ability by far crushed all the rest of them. Kaniela Ng actually gave an equally kind of strong kind of stump speech and good on camera. But there was this interesting moment where the trainer kind of said, "Well, why are you leading with education here in your speech? Is that really like the number one issue? Normally it's healthcare or the economy." And he said, "No, in Arizona, that's what people care about, and that's what I'm running on. The schools and the colleges are broken, and I'm going to fix them." How is he going to do it? Like, what makes him somebody that progressives rallied behind?
So I think the reason progressives rallied behind him was because he was also running on the other things like free college, Medicare for all, and actually abolish ICE, which a lot of people thought was political suicide in a state like Arizona.
Abolish ICE?
Yeah. And basically the other establishment candidate who is running, Farley, he kind of backed away from that and wouldn't go as far as to say abolish ICE. And so I think progressives rally behind him because he is just like one of those insurgent candidates running on like the Bernie platform.
So it's an interesting model in a sense. You check a lot of these boxes that the left cares a ton about: abolish ICE, Medicare for all, free college, and then you take the free college and you kind of pull it into a broader education agenda that then can reach everybody. Medicare for all, pretty popular policy in general, but improving education is the kind of thing that I imagine you go to voters, any voter in Arizona, and they're going to say yes. So how surprising was it that he came out on top?
I wasn't that surprised, because just watching the way he interacted with voters, I could tell that was just something that was going to resonate. I think part of his appeal as well is the fact that he focuses so much on the issues and not so much on, like the headline says, beating up on Republicans. And so I think that shows that you don't have to run as a centrist to appeal to people.
And Andrew Gillum seems to do some of this as well, which is to run on a pretty radical to progressive platform, but to be able to talk about it in terms that seem mainstream. And part of that is because the ideas actually are mainstream. You know, like everybody should have health care, everybody should have a quality education. Like everybody does mostly agree with those ideas, but for years, the way that people framed them and talked about them it sounded like you were a crazy leftist. But people like Gillum and people like Garcia are able to just kind of talk about their values. Were you surprised by Gillum?
Yeah, that one I was.
That one.
Because, yeah, it's Florida, I guess.
Yeah, it is Florida.
I guess because I lived in Arizona a bit, I was like closer to like the lefty circles, and so I could see that energy brewing for a while. But yeah, Florida surprised me.
And with Gillum, you could see him surging at the end, and it seemed like a situation where you're like, if he only had a few more weeks.
Also, the money thing.
He could, right.
He was extremely vastly outspent, and I didn't see that kind of difference in spending in Arizona. So.
Which goes to show a couple things. One, I think TV ads are vastly overrated. His opponents spent tens of millions of dollars on television ads, and he and his organization spent like $2.5 million or so on TV ads. But then, to contradict myself, his opponents spent their money on television attacking each other. So in an interesting way, they kind of took each other down